Hey Benji, how's it going?
Hey Alex. Yeah, not too bad. Yourself?
It's really just us, huh? Okay. I guess just for the recording, I'm Alex Riley. I work with DoorDash. Benji,
Benji from Graphol.
great. Cool. So let's figure out what we want to bring to the primary working group meeting. I figure we can talk briefly about what we've done since the last one, just that we have part of an implementation and we move forward for the time temporarily with the one plan, but we want to get working group buy-in on what we proceed with, um, and then we can present the options we've been discussing. Do you want to do that presentation or do you want me to do it?
I don't think I'm going to have time to get anything ready for this next working group.
Okay, it's what, the 6th? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Oh, right on the money. It was the 6th. Okay. Yeah. I'll put that together, and then if it's just gonna be the ones from the document you put together.
Yeah,
Does
I
that
think
sound
there was one other one that was floating around a little bit, but I don't remember what it is offhand. But yes. Um, I I also think that we should, and I've added it to this agenda for today. I think we should talk more about the client experience for this as well. I think a lot of what we've discussed so far is focused on the SDL, especially from a composing point of view,
right?
but in particular, the input story for users submitting operations to a server, like requests to a server that I think hasn't been I mean it's not as clear to me. So for example, even with uh solution 4, I don't actually know what you're proposing is done on the client side there. Like do all of the client documents change to use the semantic nullability directive?
Great question. I actually I've come more around to uh so okay. So as I've been doing the spec edits and as I've been doing the implementation, I think it's become more clear to me that the input and output types are kind of two different things. They have um just entirely different semantics and behavior, and they exist in basically different environments. Um, um, that said, I think in order to sort of mesh well with people's existing understanding of nullability from the languages they work in, it probably does make sense to try and align those where possible. Um, that said, I think we would just maintain um, the existing syntax. So it'd be um, yeah, I think we would maintain the existing syntax. Uh, mm, eh. There's okay. So I mean this shit's hard to talk about. You know this.
I
Uh,
do.
very fuzzy. Um, uh, but there's sort of like two things, right? So when um we look at for solution four for the question mark syntax, um if you're interacting directly with a server, if you're just sending like curl requests, effectively that makes those fields semantic nullability a semantically nullable field, a semantically non-null field is basically nullable. If you go from um, doing strict nullability on a field to semantic non-null strict non-nullability to semantic non-nullability, effectively what you're doing is you're saying this field that previously literally could not be null, we'll blow up the field to prevent it from being null. Now it can be null, um, but there's also an error. Uh, so what you're getting if you're interacting directly with the server is that semantic non-nullable fields are basically nullable. However, if you're interacting with the server through a smart client and you're doing code generation, um, then effectively those fields are non-nullable because the smart client knows how to interpret those fields um, in a way that prevents you from ever seeing nulls for those fields. It'll do errors however it wants to do errors.
Yeah,
Um,
so a client that has, for example, throw an error or something like that that can throw locally will mean that you never actually read that null.
right. But your perceived nullability for a semantically non-null field changes based on how you're interacting with the server. Um, uh, so okay, so that's one thing. The people. So where would they be seeing these this nullability syntax if they're on the client side? It would be for what variables? Is there anything else?
Yeah, variables and fragment arguments, I think, are the only places.
Right. Which um, I would guess are used more with smart clients. Does that feel right to you?
No, I think they're pretty standardly used with everything. Like even with something
Mhm.
like curl, it's easier to have a fixed GraphQL document that you read from a file and then populate a JSON object via the data option than it is to which you can do, I think, into the like query parameters and stuff. It's easier to do that than to dynamically insert like values into a GraphQL string. I don't know. It's a mixture of things. It depends what you're doing. Like there are definitely people who construct like dynamic GraphQL strings on the fly, but generally we encourage the static documents approach where you have a document with variables, and I think that does see widespread adoption,
Got
even for
it.
simple clients.
I guess the point I'm trying to get at here is that even with just client-side developers, depending on how you're interacting with a GraphQL server, your interpretation of a a unadorned field, um, your understanding of an unadorned field, might differ based on the client you're using. Um, which means what? What does that mean? That an unadorned field is potentially ambiguous for client developers, no matter which one we pick, which direction we go with. Uh,
It's
yeah,
unambiguous
I don't
currently,
have.
right?
Hmm?
In the current state of GraphQL, it seems unambiguous to me what they mean currently. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, correct. Yeah, no, no.
Okay,
I don't have an answer. I'm trying to arrive at an answer for you.
sure.
Um,
I'm just making sure I align with your interpretation. And
yeah,
what you called out earlier with the fact that inputs are different is really important. Like it's an important thing to note, and it's one of the reasons that we don't have like a built-in mirrored type. So we have separate input object and output object types because they don't match. They are different. They have different needs. Um, I think there is a need for one, which is what the struct proposal is about, but that's by the by right now. Um,
Yeah,
the other
our friend doing the implementation had to do something similar where they had to basically make that split even more explicit um, in the implementation. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I'll think about it more. I mean, this is another downside for the question mark proposal, I guess. Is yeah, inputs are. But I think I mean, maybe. Like, okay, so the GraphQL spec, it doesn't know about clients. It doesn't know, like, it has no understanding of clients, sort of. Um, so if we wanted to be like super technically correct, then maybe we could decide that semantically, like, an unadorned type does in fact represent a nullable field in both like modes in both semantically non-null semantic nullability and traditional mode. Um, uh, but I feel like it's more important to be not confusing rather than technically correct. So yeah, I don't know. I'll think about it. I'll think about it more, I guess. What are your feelings? Do you have any thoughts on this?
So I've been trying to think about it. Like when I first started thinking about it, it was mostly from a point of view of Jordan's right. We need these two schemas. We need one for null bubbling and one for no null bubbling. And making two separate schemas is a nightmare. So let's come up with a thing that means that you don't need that. And that was what the original semantic non-null was, right? It was just this in-between state that lets you have one for one way and one for the other. I wasn't really even thinking about like SDL at that point. I was still thinking in terms of two schemas. And to be honest, I still kind of do. So more recently, I've been trying to think of it from the client perspective, and I'm thinking, what does it make sense for a client to do? For a start, when it comes to specifying variables, a variable is either nullable or non-nullable. There is no semantic about it for a variable type. The client doesn't have a
Uh,
difference there.
yeah, on input. Yeah, 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 yeah.
On input, exactly.
Yeah.
So to me, if we want to continue to support existing GraphQL documents, which we definitely do, right? GraphQL is all about backwards compatibility. I
Hmm.
don't see a huge amount of value in changing the client syntax, which we could do, right? We could move to a new syntax like with question mark, for example, and then um, every client operation, in order to align it with the backend schema, you could add the semantic nullability document directive. So you could do that. And that would be someone's choice. But I'm trying to work out whether that's actually like desired. Is that something we want to move towards? And if so, how do we make it more ergonomic? Um, but I don't see much value in changing any of the syntax when it comes to the client documents at all. I don't think there's a particular need there because there is no semantic nullability there.
Right.
So then it comes to trying to align what the client reads in terms of like I'm looking at the SDL, I'm looking in graphical, for example, in the documentation, and I'm seeing the symbols there, and then I'm writing the symbols into the editable pane in graphical. What should that experience feel like? And I'm coming to the conclusion that a user should not see asterisk. They shouldn't see question mark unadorned and bang. They shouldn't see double bang. They shouldn't see any of this stuff. All they should see is the same thing that we've always had, which is unadorned or bang for non-nullable. And and I think that's what would be best for normal developers, i.e., literally the status quo from their point of view. Really, what this problem is trying to solve behind the scenes, right, is
Hmm.
A, is trying to let us put non-nullable in more positions. And B,
Sorry, just to back up for a
well,
second. We're talking about like introspection here. We're talking about what the client developer, how they, the version of the schema that they get to see. Is that what we're talking about?
yes. Let's think of it in, yeah, let's think of it as the version of the schema that they get to see, exactly as you just said. So it could be expressed in terms of SDL, it could be what they see through graphical, but it's what they are, what the client developer is directly dealing with. And to be clear, I don't mean someone who is building a client like Relay or Apollo or Urkel. I
You're talking
mean
about like an end developer.
an end developer, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, from their point of view, I think they should just see the traditional stuff. So the aim of this whole thing, right, from the original client control nullability that you raised all those years ago, is to mean that basically we don't want client developers to have to deal with nullability if they don't need to, right? And we have this nullable by default, and that's painful. It means client developers have to put in more effort. And
Yeah.
so our hope is by introducing this new technology that they can have non-nullable in more positions. However, if they have non-nullable in more positions, then we either blow up the selection sets as we do in solution 5,
Hmm.
um, or we turn off null bubbling, in which case it's then down to the client. And I think we would only do that in error handling clients. So like Apollo, Relay, cool, big ones, not Fetch, for example, unless you want to use like GraphQL Toe. Um, so in those cases, effectively, all we've done is we've moved the error bubbling from the server side of GraphQL to the client side of GraphQL, but it still effectively does the same thing. We're just saying now the client will throw rather than the server throwing. But this way
Yeah.
we can put non-nullable in more positions. So with that in mind, I actually don't think that the end user, the developer who's typing code into VS Code, I don't think they need to see whether something is semantically non-nullable or strictly non-nullable. I do not think
Hmm.
that brings them any value.
Can I ask, is there are there circumstances during normal development where because we're talking about introspection where the where an end developer is seeing the schema but like just like raw, not through the lens of some other tool or client like a code generator or graphical or whatever client they're using.
When you say the schema, do you mean like introspection results, or do you mean like SDL, or what are you exactly thinking there?
Oh, I mean, I guess either, but you're talking, are you saying, I mean, introspection is the way to grab like the full schema, right? Is there another way?
Right, but I'm just trying to clarify your question. For
Yeah.
example, it could be like, would a regular developer issue an introspection query themselves manually, deliberately? And there are
Uh,
situations where I think that is the case, but I don't think is what you're asking.
no, I guess that is so. Okay. Backing up for a second. I think you're correct. I think in most cases, people do not need to differentiate between semantically, sorry, end developers do not need to differentiate between semantically non-null and strictly non-null. Um, uh, but clients and tools do often. I don't know that graphical ever does, but like code generators and clients certainly do. Um, so when we're talking about people seeing potentially being exposed to semantically non-null fields, like knowing that they exist, um, uh, like in what situations would that happen, where they could where they aren't viewing the schema through one of these other tools?
Okay, so you can think of the server as exposing a schema and then making graphical or something like that available, right? At which point you would be interacting with that schema directly. And when you do that, presumably graphical will in the future have to develop a toggle between do you want to see the schema in null bubbling mode or no null bubbling mode, essentially,
Mhm.
right? I can imagine that. So again, it comes down to effectively the two schemas. You mentioned code generation, and I think that's a really good call. But one of the interesting things about that is code generation, again, only needs to know whether it's nullable or not. It doesn't care about the semantic. Basically, if you're running a client that has throw an error or similar behavior, then you can just take every semantic non-null in your schema and treat it as if it was strictly non-null for the purposes of code generation, because you will never read the raw null as we described earlier, right? If that's not the
I gotta
case,
look and see
cool.
what Apollo does on Swift. I think some of their code generation might like it's not just models. I think there might be some logic in there, and oop, that's wrong. And then they'd want to do different logic based on the nullability of the field.
It could be. I mean, I can imagine. No, I'm
Pat
not
yourself.
sure actually. If you disable null bubbling, then there is
Mhm.
only two types of nullability, right? There's only nullable or non or not deliberately nullable. um, if you don't disable null bubbling, then technically you can observe these three states. But I personally, that's like it's an added bonus for me if you can be bothered to leverage that. I don't think that's a major goal of this. Um,
Okay.
my again, I'm trying to look into the future, like what should GraphQL be in 2035, and I think the majority of smart clients will be error handling clients. They will turn off null bubbling, and they will only need to deal with nullable and semantically non-nullable. That's it.
Yeah.
And then when we, I haven't, I think Martin believes that is it, right? That's all we want. Um, I haven't fully 100% convinced myself that null bubbling has zero value in 2035 yet. But for a simple command line client, like the one that you described earlier, like if you've got just a bash script or something, then you effectively want that if any error happens throughout the result.
Yeah.
And if you've got that, you're now an error handling client, which means you will never see a null in a semantically non-nullable position because
Mhm.
you just throw out the entire response if that was to ever happen. So you can trust the semantic non-null types to be non-null. And all of the smart clients that have throw an error or similar behavior, they can all trust it. So there is probably a small subset of other use cases like people doing window.fetch that aren't using a throw and error behavior and want their requests to be resilient. So they want them to do, partial error handling. But I
Pretty
think
small.
it, yeah, I think it's a small percentage. Um, I don't think it's necessarily zero. Otherwise, I would probably be leaning more in favor of solution five. Um, I think there is still value in it. But I do think that we should broadly be moving in that direction. And I think that should shape some of the decisions that we make. And again, in that situation, we only have the two types of nullability.
Once this is released and out there, I mean, there are parts of this that I assume are going to make it in. I assume a way to turn off null bubbling is going to make it in regardless. That seems pretty core. Uh,
Agreed.
it would be very interesting to survey, GitHub or someone else with a large GraphQL API and see how many requests that they're fielding have it turned off. Um, that'd be Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting. Maybe null bubbling has some die-hard fans somewhere. Uh,
It makes for a simple client, if you want if you process responses that have errors and you're a simple client, it means that you can use standard type gen.
Mm.
So that's basically it. If you can implement throw on error behavior, or if you throw out any response if there's an error, then it's you don't need it in the future. But yeah, if you don't do throw on error and you do want partial responses, then error bubbling is what you want.
Got it. Okay, cool. I'll think on this more. I think you're right. I think there's a lot of value in I on in sorry, just to bring it back around on input types. I think what you said is correct. I'll see if I can write down something a little bit more solid before the working group meeting. Um, yeah.
Okay, one of the
No,
other things that you were talking about before was how the client developers would be seeing the schema, right? And I want to point out one of the contradictions of, or contraindications, whatever you want to call it, of what I was saying before of the two schemas approach. And that is GraphQL is often used as a lingua franca between the client and the server, right? And in some shops, they even encourage the exact same SDL document to be used, i.e., the client developers might write the SDL document of here is what we need, and then send it to the back end to implement. And effectively, they want this exact contract implemented. And if that's the case, you don't have two flavors of that schema, you have one schema.
mm,
Um, Now, I would say that for a front end developer doing that, they would indicate to the back end developers whether or not they're using an error handling client. And then we can take that schema and we can convert it into the right format. So whether it be do nothing because they're not using an error handling client, or turn all of the bangs to be semantic non-null because they are using an error handling client, that's still an option. But there was certainly like a year and a half, 2 years ago, whenever it was we were discussing this a bit more, there certainly was a lot of pushback around the concept of having two separate schemas. The idea that actually we just want this SDL to be shared with everyone. We don't want two views of it. And I think that stance does actually like that does have merit. I don't want to like
yeah.
downgrade the merit of that. I do think that there is a lot of advantages to having it respect the client, not least that quite a few clients now, especially like Apollo client, for example, give you the ability to do client local schema extensions. And if you
Hmm.
do client local schema extensions and you want to do code gen, you want your code gen to be generated based on the resulting schema, not the source schema from the server, but from the schema with all of this, the local extensions mixed in. And if we're doing that anyway, may as well mix in the client's error handling capabilities and just, generate it on. This is kind of the perspective that I'm saying, which is you see the client's representation of the schema rather than the server's representation of it. And I think that is quite a big shift, but I also think it is probably what we want longer term.
Yeah.
But there is not unanimity around that, just to be clear. It's just my opinion.
Yeah. There's a lot of opinions. Do you know if Martin, I think Martin was one of the people who really wanted the client developers and server developers understanding of the schema to be the same. Do you know if he still feels that way?
I couldn't speak to that, I'm afraid.
Uh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay, at the working group meeting, um like how do you want to make this decision of what we move forward with? Do you want to like float all these and just sort of feel out the vibe, or like what like how do you want to uh like make this actionable?
Um, Probably the most straightforward thing to do would be effectively a status report. The largest piece of work that's happened most recently is, of course, the big comparison document. So really, we should make sure that that's in a good state, and then we should present that to the working group.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've not done yet is because, I just scratched it out quite quickly, and we've done a bit of iteration on it, but we should go through and weight the various things, figure out how much we care about them. Broadly, all the new ones I've added, I've just put them all as number one priority just because it the point is we haven't gone through and actually analyzed them. So I would like to do something like that as a group and argue what the various ratings should be. Nonetheless, I think that the document is still useful. So presenting, we've got these ideas. Here's what they would mean for clients. Here's what they would mean for servers. Here are the trade-offs of the various ones. If anyone has any strong opinions, please come to our working groups. Um, yeah, what do we actually want out of this?
Do you think it's reasonable to get those weightings done before the 6th? Like, could we tag a bunch of people and say, tell us how strongly you feel from 1 to 10 about each of these, and then sort of take the average of all those?
Um, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it should be feasible to get some feedback on it, right?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to work out the best way. I think like one of the most straightforward ways is, for example, say you disagree with one of them, you open a pull request to change it, and that is effectively your, I think that this should be changed. I think if we were to do that, we should do it, and it's ridiculous, but we should do it one pull request per item. Then each one can be individually argued, and if everyone agrees, we can just merge it. If there's disagreement, we can discuss it in more detail, even though it's a single character change in a pull request, which is a bit silly. But I think that's probably the most direct way forward. Otherwise, as you say, yeah, literally just sending out a spreadsheet, actually. Let's do that. A Google spreadsheet, put each of the options down the left-hand side, put a bunch of names of the people in the working group across the top, and then each person can put a rating 1, 2, 3, or X in the relevant column. And if there's general agreement, like if it's mostly twos and some ones, we'll put it as a two. But if some of them have more of a swing, like someone's put it as a one, someone else has put it as an X, then those will probably need more discussion because they're a bit controversial.
Okay. I guess do you think we're capable of arriving at a decision by the 6th, or do you think this is going to take another month? Like by the end of
Um,
the working group meeting, will we know how we're going to proceed?
I think we need another month, honestly.
Okay.
My motivation for doing that document was to try and advance us towards thinking rather than just in terms of the syntax, thinking about all of the different trade-offs of the different solutions. So I was hoping that it would be an action to move us towards some some consensus. Um, One of the really interesting things that's come out of it for me is actually the at semantic non-null directive, which is what everyone's already doing, is actually coming out as like one of the preferred solutions because
Hmm.
it ticks all the boxes, which I find really interesting. I don't think we should go ahead with that. Like, I think it's too, I mean, we can do that indefinitely until we come up with a solution that we're agreed upon, right? Like, we don't need to change the syntax if a directive will do for now. Long term, we should change it to make it easier for people. But it's surprising to me just how well that fits all of the criteria. And we haven't really come up with a criteria that it particularly fails, other than ergonomics.
Long.
Um,
Yeah.
and also Martin's proposal, which is essentially like, no, all we want is null bubbling disabled. Let's just move to the future, which I think is a really good way to argue for an extreme. And then that basically it forces us to evaluate like well, is he right? Is this what the future of GraphQL is? In 10 years' time, is this what we're going to be? If so, maybe this is the right solution, and we just need to give people 10 years to move there.
Wait,
Or
are you talking about 5 or are you talking about GraphQL 2.0?
five,
Okay.
which is
Okay.
basically stick with the current syntax and just use not null in semantically non-null positions, i.e., break all of your existing clients.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay, that's interesting. I think I had misinterpreted what 5 was. I thought he was suggesting just like turning off non or I guess just turning off null bubbling is that's what that is, sort of.
So it would still be opting in to turning off null bubbling. What his proposal basically says is in your schema, any position that is semantically non-nullable, mark it as non-nullable, which is not something that would invalidate any existing GraphQL documents, right? They would still pass validation, they would still execute, but it does change the error boundaries. So it is technically
Mhm.
a breaking change. It's a breaking change that wouldn't actually wouldn't be spotted by any tooling because generally we see changing nullable to non-nullable on output as non-breaking because clients just won't ever receive that null there. But the fact of changing the null boundaries if is arguably a breaking change. And I'm really struggling with that because like it kind of isn't a breaking change, but it also is a very strict it's not a breaking change, it's a change in behavior of existing operations. That's the challenge.
That's another thing that's between, my day-to-day work I've been doing and this the concept of a breaking change is a lot more fuzzy, a lot more of a spectrum
Yeah.
than uh very much not clear cut. So like GraphQL allows schema developers to make what are breaking changes, and we've just decided that there's like a threshold behind which, you're doing something kind of dumb, but you can do it. You can change a field from an integer to a string if you want to. Uh, and that'll happen. And then there's going like you said, going from non-nullable or sorry, from nullable to non-nullable is not a breaking change if you're not using a code generator with types. But if you are using a code generator with types, and you regenerate, your models, that's gonna break some stuff. Like you're gonna have to
Right.
do some regeneration, but that's not because of the spec, that's because of the way people have chosen to use GraphQL. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
GraphQL takes a very narrow stance on what a breaking change is. And a breaking change is one that causes existing deployed operations to
Mhm.
break. So
Yeah,
if you've deployed a client 10 years ago, and now you remove a field from your schema that it was querying, that will break that client. That query will no longer execute, and thus it is a breaking change. Um, so from that perspective, we don't really care. Like if it means you have to change some code to deploy your next version of the client, we don't care about that. We don't see that as a breaking change. That's just a tooling shift.
right.
Um, I mean, it is something to be aware of, right? Migration effort. But
Yeah.
like, for example, solution 4, because of the opt-in via the document directive when you do it on a per file basis, um, actually you can adopt a new version of the spec that supports this new capability, and none of your code needs to have changed. Like you just won't get the feature. We could potentially introduce a new version that like just enables like SDL now has this property because that wouldn't break any existing client operations. It would be a migration effort for people adopting it, and I think it would count as a breaking change in a different way, but not in the way that we tend to care about. So yeah, it is an interesting and, as you say, subtle thing. And I was speaking with Lee about it the other day and basically saying, look, this thing that we've always said is not a breaking change, taking a nullable field and making it non-nullable and output. If we do that wholesale across the whole schema, is that actually a breaking change? And I quoted Lee in the document. I forget what the exact wording he used was, but essentially he was like, yes, it's a change in the behavior of the old client. So even though their queries still execute, the behavior of them has changed. Like
Hmm.
the error handling capabilities that they would have had baked into them has changed,
Yeah.
which technically means that anyone who changes a nullable field, sorry, to a non-nullable field is also making kind of potentially a breaking change because again, they're moving those error boundaries.
But it's even more subtle than that. If we're describing behavioral changes as breaking changes, then like changing the behavior of an underlying resolver is a breaking change. You know what I mean? And that doesn't seem to, I don't know. I feel like that doesn't clear the threshold, right?
Right. So if you had a field on user that returned name, but it was a nullable string, and now you only ever return null for it, that's arguably a breaking change, right?
Or even like you have it used to only return the user's first name and now it returns their full name. Is that a breaking change? Right? You're breaking maybe assumptions that people were making about the field, but I don't know. That doesn't feel like it click. I don't know. This is so fuzzy. It is not clear cut.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. Agreed. I
Um,
think the error handling. I mean, yeah, like if you had a username and name and then you switch them round, that would that would be really weird. Um, and I would see that as kind of a breaking change, but also it's not the kind of thing that someone would really like do. So I'm not sure we need to worry too much about it. Whereas upgrading a field from non-nullable being nullable to non-nullable is like a common change that people would make. Like, actually, you know what? This thing's always going to be here, and I'm bored of doing null checks. Let's just make it non-nullable. Done.
there are. Did you ever? I mean, I might be getting way too off topic here. Did you ever read about Darklang? I think it might be dead now, but you ever read about this?
Maybe.
They took like a really hard stance on it was like this, it was a language, but it was also a whole server deployment system where basically every time you made any change to an endpoint to like a method or whatever, it would version it. So any clients, if they wanted the new behavior, would have to bump the version of that method or that endpoint they were using. Which so for them, like these behavioral changes were being treated as breaking changes, and they were trying to prevent. I don't know. This is neither here nor there. I thought it was very interesting. I think it's dead now, but I thought it was interesting.
That is kind of interesting. Yeah. It's challenging because it means you can never fix any bugs. Like your bugs will never fix old versions of clients.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That fixing that bug is a breaking change. Um, okay. Okay. So at the working group meeting, we'll present the document you've created. I think it's good. I think it's a good idea to have like a more clear-cut way to compare all these things. Um, if I can sort of suss out what the vibe is, maybe people immediately go hard in one direction or another, or like if like the whole group is very against any of the proposals, are you comfortable eliminating those?
Um, I mean, let's see. It's very hard on a 20-minute discussion, for example, to actually eliminate a thing because many of the people that will be raising these things to don't necessarily know the history. of it
Hmm.
or the reasons behind it. I mean, no one's going to be able to digest that full document fully in 20 minutes and then give a solid opinion on it. Like it will take longer than that to fully digest things. So I think we'll take it under advisement. And also, especially, I think one of the valuable outcomes of this might be which things people care about, like feature wise, which things people don't care about, and how to express those. Because what really surprised me was just how much people cared about the actual final syntax of this. Like it's the main point of contention. And for me, everything else about this is so much more important than the syntax.
Yeah.
Um, but also the syntax, like if you change it, like if you do the question mark, that has so many ramifications on what it means for like, oh, what do client documents mean now? What, how do we do this, that, and the other? What does it mean for legacy documents? Like the shift is quite large.
Yeah.
Um, but again, I think it's people like looking at the existing ecosystem of programming languages and saying, well, question mark is what we use for nullable, so that's what we should use. It's kind of the knee-jerk reaction, and it's like instinctively feels right. But also, if you look into it deeper, it's like actually there's a lot of trade-offs here. Um, so
Yeah, this
yeah,
is not just strictly picking what character, like how the field is spelled. It
yeah.
there's a lot going on. Uh
And I think if we were to do like solution one, right, is just the case of picking a character.
yeah.
That's all it is. But none of the characters we came up with, and we went through like what 25 different combinations of characters. No one liked any of them. Um, but if we could all agree on one, that would be all that needed. It just needs a choice of character. But if we're shifting other things around, it's suddenly like each solutions two, three, and four, all of them, they all have this like extra cognitive overhead that they're adding.
Yeah. I so just where I'm at personally, I don't know. I've said this. I'm pushing forward the thing that people voted for, but where I'm at personally is I think solution one is probably the move. My initial thing was kind of, I was looking at the syntax and I thought that the just using unfamiliar syntax would be more confusing for people than sort of the everything around proposal for. But as I've started to do the implementation and the spec edits, I think, and we've sort of poked at these corners of like the input and everything, and what are we gonna do on the introspection and all that. I'm becoming more convinced that all of that is more confusing than an asterisk. Uh, I don't know. I'll DM you better thoughts later, but uh, I feel like there's also a world where we start with solution one, and then if we at some point in the future feel more comfortable making a larger breaking change, then we move to the solution for syntax without all the extra stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
and we can still do that with a document directive, right? Like
right.
basically without the document directive, you use the asterisk, and with the document directive, you use question mark and bang, It's I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's where I'm at. Yeah. Do you think we can you think it's reasonable that I mean we can see how the working group meeting goes, but do you think it's reasonable that we could have a uh uh like a more clear direction by the end of the subsequent working group meeting?
Let me give you just a summary of where I think we're at. I think we're all pretty much agreed that clients like Relay, need the ability to disable null bubbling. I think that is agreed. We need that. I think we're all agreed, except for Martin, that we need a way to represent. I think most of us have agreed that we need a way to represent that in traditional mode and in no null bubbling mode, there are these fields that will behave differently so that we can put the non-nulls in more positions, but only in no null bubbling mode. Martin's
Mhm.
proposal is like just put it everywhere. What we already have, which is, fine. I understand that stance, but I don't agree with it. So there's not 100% uniformity there, but I think generally we are agreed on that. We're also, I think, generally agreed that if we are doing that, the solution to it is a semantic non-null type, not a semantic null type.
Yeah.
So that seems to also be fairly agreed upon. The proposal that doesn't agree with that right now, other than obviously number five, is number two, I think.
Yeah.
And
Lee's
it's,
proposal is the one I want to eliminate if we can. If we can get Lee's buy-in to eliminate it, I think we should.
I think that will probably be fine. I spoke to him about it the other day and expressed my concerns with it and like asked him to answer, like, what does this mean? And he's like, yes, good question. This may be that I didn't think this through fully enough. So it could be that he's cogitated on it and figured out what he meant or whatever. But what he did say to me, I think, was that he hadn't he wasn't expecting the input and output types to different syntax, I think is what he was saying. But anyway, yeah. I'm not gonna, yeah, don't quote that completely. I'm not sure that I've actually captured what he was saying there. I'd much rather hear it from him at the working group. So we'll hear that. But yeah, I think solution two we probably will be able to rule out, but it is actually more different from solution four than I originally realized because I kept thinking of solution two and four as being the same solution, and it wasn't until like a month ago or whatever that I realized that they actually weren't the same solution. Um, they just use the same syntax, which is interesting. Um, there's things that we haven't agreed on. One is the mechanism of how to disable null bubbling, and another is what this actually means in terms of introspection. We've agreed on some of that, I would say. So we've agreed on the semantic non-null as a wrapper type, I think. But what we haven't agreed on is like, should that always be presented through introspection? Should it be something that you opt into through introspection? Or should it be something that defaults based on your mode of communication with the schema? For example, if you turn off null bubbling, should you see semantic non-null?
Yeah.
Further to that, and again, this is me thinking about it from a client perspective, what does it mean for output types? If you introspect a schema and you only want to see the semantic non-nulls, do you then see semantic non-nulls on input types as well for like when you're going to populate your variables, your fields, arguments, sorry, your input fields? And that I think is even like more subtle. I think honestly those should remain non-null, which means that a error handling client would see an error handling client who is uh, introspecting wants to see semantic non-null on output fields, but strict non-null on input fields, I think. But again, that is not completely agreed upon. And what the impact of that is on the SDL that is output is also not 100% clear to me. Like, is it okay? And this is why I added the tables just earlier this week. I'm not sure if you saw that yet. I went through and overhauled the syntax in that document. And I've given a column for input syntax and output syntax because input syntax doesn't have semantic non-null. And I was trying to think, well, what do we how would we represent these things? So I actually now show that some of the well, all of them use a different syntax for input versus output, I think, other than solution five.
Mm. Oh, wait. They all use a different syntax for what does solution one do?
Hang on, oh no, solution one, you're right, does the exact same syntax because the asterisk
Yeah.
just doesn't exist. Yes.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So two, three, and four
Which
all
I think
use
would
different.
be the move. I mean, yeah, yeah, those are unambiguous and yeah. Yeah. Okay. Got it. I think I agree with all that. I think I agree with where there's some stuff we got to sort out. I think doing the weighting, the weighting the different things, and I think that'll be valuable. Um, I'm gonna continue to not get super involved in that discussion. I think I just get too into it, and I'm very, very short on time right now. But uh, do you want to take care of that spreadsheet you were talking about?
Yeah, I'll add it to my list of things to do tomorrow.
Okay.
Um, Nullability, create
Cool.
spreadsheet for weightings of RFCs. Yeah, cool.
So you can do the spreadsheet. I'll put together, I'll figure out how I want to present stuff at the working group meeting. And then we will be good to go. Was there any other action items?
Um, I do have one question, which you've said a few times. You're not exactly the champion of Solution 4.
Okay.
Uh, we do need individuals to be champions of things, ideally. So, are you happy still being the champion of that? Or should we just change it to a hyphen, a dash for now to say that there isn't currently an active champion?
I yeah, I don't know. I'll be the champion if that one gets picked. Basically I didn't want to give the impression, just to be straight with you. We had a bunch of, new people start to get engaged with discussion. We have what's the guy's name who's doing the implementation?
Yovi?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I didn't want to give the impression to people who are just joining this without like months and months of context that I was like shoving through this proposal without any support for some reason. Um, and so that was what I was doing there. That's what I wanted. That's why I was pushing back on being like it being called like my proposal and being the champion of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, generally what we try and do is write up the various different ones, see how far they can get, and that helps us to discover the issues with them. But yeah, I get that. If you're yeah, I understand. Cool.
Okay.
There are you may be better able to represent these, but there was a couple. In fact, if you can check the evaluations for solution four, particularly L and M, I didn't manage to actually analyze for it.
You got that up? Can you send me the link?
Yes, I will do that. It will go in the Zoom chat, and here it is.
Okay, cool. Oh, yeah, yeah, they're all lettered. That's right. I was trying to remember what L and M stood for. Uh, right. Okay. Okay. Cool.
So yeah, partly I think one of the one of the interesting things about this exercise has been, and like I know that we're over time, so I won't keep you much longer. One of the interesting things about this exercise has been that the proposals come with a mechanic, but they also often come with a recommended like behavioral change on the part of developers. So, for example, solution five, the behavioral change, like the mechanic is nothing. We're just adding we're adding, sorry, no null bubbling, which we're going to add anyway, hopefully. And
Uh-huh.
there is no other mechanical change. What is changing, though, is that we're encouraging you as the developers to put to put strict non null in more positions. And for solution three, for example, the behavioral changes, I think that you should be taking the schema from the client, not from the server. I think you should reflect your client's understanding of the schema in terms of how it handles errors and in terms of local schema extensibility, as we discussed earlier.
Hmm.
And I think that those actually weigh in quite heavily into how the proposals are handled. Like if you don't want to go along with that pattern, then some of them are less attractive. So like putting the semantic non-null directive on everything's going to make your schema messy. So if you don't like have a client local equivalent of that that doesn't have all those directives everywhere, everyone's going to have directives everywhere, and it might look a bit of a mess. That kind of thing. So these ones, I think the general GraphQL consumers should only need to think about nullable versus non-nullable. I'm trying to work out whether that aligns with your perspective on this, which is why I was asking you earlier about like what it means for the client queries. Like, do you, in your sorry, in solution four, not your solution, in solution four, would you imagine that most client developers would be reading STL and interacting in graphical with a schema that shows both unadorned bang and question mark in their schema?
Um,
You don't have to
uh,
answer that now. That's just broadly what this question, I think, is.
yeah,
L.
yeah. I think they would because there's no. I mean, on graphical, there's no. It's not doing any error handling, so you would just get the raw output. So knowing the difference between semantically non-null and strictly non-null and nullable, I think would be relevant.
I think we would teach graphical. Um,
Error handling.
well, not necessarily error handling so much as we would tell it which whether to run with null bubbling or not. And
Yeah,
if we see this as running in two main modes, which is basically, is it running in error handling? The client, is it running in the server does the error handling or the client does the error handling mode? That's essentially it, right? It's a toggle. Which side of the wire do we want to do error handling on?
right.
That's really what it is at the end of the day. Then we could add a toggle like that to graphical once this feature goes in.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'll look at this. I'll get you an answer on L and M here. I'll bookmark this. Come back to it.
Awesome. Yeah, if you could go through these and make sure that they correctly represent solution four, that would be really helpful. I'll do the spreadsheet and I'll push that out so that people can start weighing in on that. And then this is all with the aim of doing it in time for bringing it to the working group on Thursday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
That'd be good. And then, I mean, yeah, we could add more people. I don't know. Uh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Cool. Um, good talking to you. Anything else?
That's it from me, Alex.
All right. This was very productive. I appreciate it, man.
Awesome. Thanks for chatting. Catch you next time.
Yeah.